The natural progression for a COO is really not to be a CEO. Most COOs, it's to run a bigger company, or it's to be a COO of a better brand, or to be a COO of a different type of industry. I don't know the exact percentage, but maybe 5% or less have the DNA to go off and become the entrepreneurial CEO. We've seen a few of our members have gone off to do it, but they were usually founding employees who were in the integrator role.
You've been a COO and that's been your career, but you are now an entrepreneurial CEO.
Yes.
How has that transition been? And did you have what it took? And how did you find out you had what it took?
Really interesting. So I'm a very unique human. I was an entrepreneur at 7 years old. I ran 12 or 13 different entrepreneurial companies by the time I was 18. When I was 20 years old, I had 12 full-time employees working in the company that I started. So I was an entrepreneur. I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. The first real company that I ran when I was in university was a franchise. And I was so nervous of failing that I memorized a 350-page operating manual. So I was an entrepreneur that learned that there were systems and playbooks in place. And if I ran the playbooks, I'd be successful. And those playbooks allowed me to scale. I then started working at the head office of this company. It was called College Pro Painters. That was back when I hired Kimball Musk, Elon's younger brother, worked for me back in 1993. Peter Reeve, who was his cousin who built Solar City, I hired and trained Peter as well. I was a very entrepreneurial kind of operator because of the franchising world that I grew up in. Then I built a couple of franchise companies as a co-founder or a COO, but I was really in an entrepreneurial organization operating as that COO, but operating with these entrepreneurial playbooks I learned at College Pro Painters. Even building 1-800-GOT-JUNK, Brian was my best friend before I joined him. He was my best man at my wedding before I started working for him. So he and I kind of built this thing together, but I was the COO of a very fast growing entrepreneurial company. When it hit 3,000 people, I was pulling my hair out. I was way over my skis. I'd hit my glass ceiling at 60 million and I was bumping it hard at 100 million. So when I left the company and Brian replaced me with the former president of Starbucks USA, Lonnie came in and said, "What a cute little business." And I was like, it's so big, right? So I'm much more of an entrepreneurial COO than I am a traditional COO. I would die in a corporate environment. I wouldn't be able to make it in a corporate COO kind of world because I'm too entrepreneurial. So the transition for me to be an entrepreneur was easy because I've always been an entrepreneur. But I've learned a lot of the OCD systems, the playbooks and the systems to counter my ADD and bipolar nature of being an entrepreneur. I'm not the traditional COO type for sure.
Thank you for sharing your story. It's fascinating. My follow-on question is, for so many COOs, the obvious next step is to become a CEO.
No, that's what's really interesting is most COOs don't have the entrepreneurial DNA, nor do they have the desire to be the CEO. Sheryl Sandberg, as an example, never wanted to go off and run her own company. The natural progression for a COO is really not to be a CEO. Most COOs, it's to run a bigger company, or it's to be a COO of a better brand, or to be a COO of a different type of industry. I don't know the exact percentage, but maybe 5% or less have the DNA to go off and become the entrepreneurial CEO. We've seen a few of our members have gone off to do it, but they were usually founding employees who were in the integrator role. So I think of like Zach Morrison, who built Tenuity. It used to be called Elite SEM. He was a founding employee, grew Tenuity from like 5 employees up to 300 or 400 employees. And then his CEO moved into chairman and Zach moved from COO into CEO. But he was really there from the day one as like a co-founder. Matt Wool, who built Acceleration Partners, same thing, there from very early and now helping it scale. So it's very rare that most COOs want to or have the skills or the traits to be a CEO. Most guys don't want to be women. Most women don't want to be guys. There's a few that do and they go transgender, but most just don't want to do it. It would be really cool to have a baby, but didn't want it bad enough. But I wonder what it would be like to be a woman and have a child, but not enough that I wanted to go do that.
I'm thinking about the analogy related to myself. I'm not sure if it works exactly, but I would say this. So I think I'm in this 5% category, which is I'm looking for a good CEO role to kind of as my natural transitional step. I've been a CEO for 7 years now across 2 different companies. It's been fabulous. I've loved the roles. It's been tremendously fun and enjoyable, and I've learned a tremendous amount as well. So I guess for myself in this respect, I guess the one question that's kind of that I've thought about a lot is like, what would happen if Brandon ran an organization kind of like in the style that I thought was best. Because ultimately, as we all know, at the end of the day, the decision maker, or the final decision maker, is the CEO for organizations. So if I was planted as a CEO, unencumbered, as it were, what would then happen to that organization? So I feel like that experiment is worth running.
It is.
So,
and Greg, were you a COO for these two companies? Were they entrepreneurial companies that you were a COO of?
They were scale ups. So they're both founder-led organizations, right?
Right. So when you're a COO of a founder-led scale-up organization, it is a fairly natural progression to want to go do that on your own, but you probably have a lot of that entrepreneurial DNA that a COO doesn't typically have. So that's where it does kind of make sense, right? But if you're the COO of a mature company and you're growing up from a mature company to a next level, it's just a different DNA. The things that COOs have to get better at is delegating and growing people and not overseeing it, letting other people oversee it, right? We have to get better at not focusing on the monthly plan and the weekly numbers. We have to get better at staying focused on the 3-year vision, the culture, the BHAG, the core purpose. We have to be better at looking at what's happening with the economy and the market and the trends and plugging ourselves into other communities so that we're learning from osmosis and then communicating back to the team. Most COOs tend to get fairly focused on the playbooks and the systems, and that matters, but it needs to be other people that are doing it for us.
Again, it'll stop your career. Sorry. It'll hold you back if you can't let go.
My brother and his wife have been married for 25 years now, and they have what they call blue jobs and pink jobs. They decided that blue and pink doesn't really mean men and female anymore. They're just like, there's a list, and because he actually likes doing dishes. She likes doing, cutting the grass. I'll make that as an example. So what was traditionally a blue or pink job, they said, that. They just decided there's differences. If you're going to be a COO moving into the CEO role, you have to get people to do the old COO tasks that you're used to doing. And you have to start doing the stuff that isn't natural, that sometimes felt frivolous. It used to drive me crazy, frankly, that Brian would walk around 1-800-GOT-JUNK, or in the later days, because we were in so much square foot, on a scooter, he would zip around the office dressed in a Halloween costume on a random Thursday in the summer. I'm like, what are you doing? Actually, he was doing exactly what he needed to be doing. He needed to stir the Kool-Aid. He needed to get the energy going. He needed to be the chief energizing officer. And I was so focused on the plan or the numbers or the systems that I sometimes missed that bigger purpose. And I think that's the hard part for COOs to make that leap, is you are going to start doing the pink jobs instead of the blue jobs, or you're going to start doing the blue jobs instead of the pink jobs. And you have to be able to release that stuff, because you will never scale it if you try to do both.
I love that. And it's very fascinating, and led me into my final question, which was from when you were speaking earlier around the COO being the best leader in the organization, or the strongest leader for all the different reasons, begs the question, what's the CEO's job? And I think you've somewhat answered it, but I'd love a little bit more on how to make it clear what a COO and a CEO do, so that there's not stepping on toes and threats and the rest of the problems the relationship can have.
So I like CEOs to never have more than 4 or 5 direct reports, because they also have legal, they have the board, and they have culture as kind of direct reports that they have to oversee. CEOs have to care about vision and culture and kind of the recruiting and trends. They have to make sure that they ask the leadership questions. So an example of a great leadership question, I was being groomed by the COO at Starbucks. So Greg Johnson was growing me, mentoring me over a period of 2 years. And he said he got a phone call one day from the CEO, from Howard Schultz, the founder. And Howard said, why is the letter B on this specific sign on this specific location in Seattle not working? And Greg said, I don't care. The question you need to ask me is, what system do we have in place to ensure that every letter on every sign at all of our locations are always working? So that's the leadership question. CEOs have to ask the leadership questions. So even though we notice that, why is that thing broken? The question is, what system is missing that allowed that thing to be broken? Or what system is broken that allowed that thing to be broken? So we need to notice the things. Entrepreneurs tend to notice everything because of our ADD. We see all the problems, we see all the opportunities, but we need to ask the leadership question about what's the missing system versus why is that one thing doing what it's doing. It's not why do we run out of money, or it's not why do we not have enough whatever, or how did we ever hire that person, or why are we firing? It's what system was missing. We got to ask those questions and then let the COO figure out what systems to put in place to fix those.
If our listeners could only remember and take away one thing from our conversation, what would that be?
It's that none of this actually matters. That at the end of the day, this is just what we do to make money. It's just what our employees are doing to make money. None of us are getting out of this alive. What we have to do as leaders, if we care about our employees, if we actually care about them as humans, if we care about their problems, their insecurities, their fears, their home life, and not attach it to anything, but if we actually care, they'll go through brick walls for us to build the company. And that's kind of the lesson that I always want people to remember, is that we tend to focus on all the stuff, but what really matters is the people.
I think you build a world-class company around communications. Everything is about how you communicate and interact with the team that you serve. And so when you can provide sort of we call it a frictionless or seamless experience, I think that's the key. If it's cumbersome and it's hard, it's not going to work. But sort of bridging the gap with the way